A black man forced to serve at an exclusive art auction, unaware that his wife owned the venue. "You shouldn't even be here," whispered Isabella Moretti, co-chair of the Moretti Art Foundation, pushing David towards the kitchen.
"Someone like you can only serve at this kind of event, not attend it."
David Cooper, 33, held the crystal tray steady as he felt dozens of curious eyes on him. He was the only black person in the main gallery, surrounded by celebrated artists, affluent collectors, and art critics sipping champagne that cost hundreds of dollars a bottle. What none of them knew was that the man who had just been publicly humiliated had a secret that would turn the night into a collective nightmare. "Sorry for the confusion," David murmured with a calmness that intrigued some of those present. "I just came to deliver this to—" But Isabella interrupted him with a sharp gesture. "We don't have time for stories. The catering staff is overwhelmed, and you're going to help wash the glasses now." The room fell into an awkward silence. Some guests lowered their eyes. Others whispered among themselves, but no one dared to question the co-chair's decision. After all, Isabella Moretti had been organizing the most prestigious art events in Zurich for 2 decades. David took a deep breath, remembering something his wife had said that morning. Sometimes people reveal who they really are when they think no one important is watching. At the time, he hadn't fully understood the comment, but now it made perfect sense. 3 hours earlier, he had arrived at the main entrance of the gallery, wearing an elegant tailored suit. The security guard at the door looked him up and down and pointed to the back of the building. "The service entrance is that way," he said, without even asking his name or checking the guest list. David smiled diplomatically. "Actually, I should be on the main list." "I'm sure you are." The guard laughed sarcastically. "They all say that." Now, in the kitchen filled with steam and the clatter of fine glassware, David rolled up his sleeves and began the work that had been assigned to him. Around him, other employees, all white or of color, worked in silence, accustomed to this kind of treatment. "Don't worry," whispered Sophia, a woman who had been drying glasses for 20 years at events like this. "People like them have always been like this. They think we're invisible." David nodded, but his eyes shone with an intensity that the experienced Sophia couldn't decipher. There was something different about this man, a quiet confidence that didn't fit the situation. As he polished a silver platter, David listened to the laughter coming from the main gallery. Isabella Moretti was telling a group how she had put an intruder in his place, eliciting approving laughter. The comment reached David's ears through the half-open kitchen door. "Some people just don't know their place in the world," Isabella declared loudly, clearly referring to the incident. "It's our responsibility to educate them." It was at that moment that David smiled for the first time that evening, a smile that contained decades of patience, years of planning, and the anticipatory satisfaction of someone about to completely rewrite the rules of the game. Because what Isabella Moretti and her guests didn't know was that the intruder in the kitchen held a secret so powerful that it would turn the most important night of the Zurich elite into the most talked-about scandal of the intruder decade. If you're enjoying this story of justice and want to find out how a simple humiliation turned into the most satisfying revenge anyone has ever witnessed, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what happened when the truth was revealed changed the lives of everyone present in that gallery forever. While David scrubbed the fine china plates that cost more than many people's monthly salary, Isabella decided that a simple humiliation wasn't enough. "You're washing too slowly," declared the organizer, entering the kitchen with 2 other guests to witness the spectacle. "People like you should be grateful for any job opportunity, but it seems you can't even do that right." Gideon Blackwood, a hedge fund manager known for his controversial opinions, laughed loudly. "Isabella, you are too kind. In my company, someone like that wouldn't even make it past the interview." "That's exactly why our society is the way it is," added Olivia Sterling, an heiress to a shipping fortune. "We give too many chances to those who don't deserve them." David continued washing, but his shoulders stiffened. Sophia, the veteran employee, whispered, "Don't listen to them, dear. They only do that because they feel superior."
What Sophia didn't know was that David Cooper was no ordinary employee. A magna cum laude graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he had spent the last 12 years quietly building an empire in AI-driven art market analysis, helping collectors and museums navigate the complex world of fine art acquisitions. His client list included some of the largest private collections in the country, but he always preferred to work behind the scenes. "You know what irritates me the most?" continued Isabella, clearly enjoying the audience. "It's these people who try to infiltrate our events, pretending to be someone they're not, as if we can't see through the facade." David smiled inwardly. If Isabella knew that the facade included an $80 million personal fortune and connections that could destroy reputations with a single phone call, she might think twice before continuing. "Look at those hands," Olivia said, pointing at David as if he were an object on display. "I bet you've never held anything more valuable than a plastic plate." David's hands, which Olivia was examining with contempt, had signed multi-million-dollar contracts, closed international deals, and ironically, saved the reputations of collectors who were now represented at that very auction. "You know what kind of people these are," Gideon murmured, lowering his voice theatrically. "Always trying to get ahead in life through shortcuts. Probably came here hoping to meet some rich woman and settle down." Isabella laughed, as if any of us would give someone like that a second glance. It was at that moment that David decided to reveal just a small fragment of who he really was. He turned slowly, drying his hands with deliberate calm, and looked directly into Isabella's eyes. "Interesting perspective," he said in a soft but authoritative voice that made everyone in the kitchen stop what they were doing, especially considering that this gala is being held to raise funds for underprivileged young artists. "I imagine they would be curious to know how donors really think about people who come from humble backgrounds." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella blinked several times, clearly disconcerted by the sudden change in dynamics. "Excuse me?" stammered the organizer. "I'm just observing the irony," David continued, his posture now upright and confident. "You are here to help the less fortunate, but you cannot treat a person you believe to be in that category with dignity." Gideon cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Well, that's completely different." "Is it?" David interrupted him gently. "Because to me, it seems like exactly the same mentality that perpetuates the inequalities that are, in your words, supposedly, your mission to combat." The tension in the kitchen was palpable. The other employees stopped working, sensing that something important was happening. Isabella, accustomed to being the most powerful person in any environment, clearly didn't know how to deal with someone who wasn't intimidated by her authority. "You're being very bold for someone in your position," Isabella finally managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. David smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes and contained decades of experience in dealing with people just like Isabella. "Well, Isabella hesitated, realizing she was about to say something that could sound even more prejudiced than she already had. "I'm what?" David asked softly, taking a step toward the group. At that moment, Sophia looked at David with new admiration. In 20 years of working for the elite, she had never seen anyone confront people of this caliber with such elegance and authority. Isabella tried to regain control of the situation. "He's washing dishes in my kitchen. That should give you some perspective on hierarchies." "Your kitchen," David repeated, raising an eyebrow. "How interesting. And tell me, Isabella, do you know exactly who owns this gallery?" Isabella's discomfort was now visible. "Well, it's rented for the event, obviously." "Obviously," David agreed. But his tone suggested there were layers of irony Isabella wasn't picking up on. What neither of them knew was that David had arrived at that gallery 3 hours earlier, not as an intruder trying to infiltrate,
but as someone who had every reason in the world to be there.
And in 45 minutes, when his wife arrived from the emergency board meeting, the true hierarchy of that house would be revealed in a way that would forever change Isabella's perspective on who really held the power in that room. As Isabella tried to process the shift in dynamics, something in David's eyes made her realize he had made a terrible mistake, but she still couldn't pinpoint exactly what that mistake was. Isabella felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine when David questioned the ownership of the gallery. There was something about the way that man spoke, a natural authority that didn't match his current position as an employee, that made her deeply uncomfortable. Obviously, this gallery belongs to the Fairchilds, Isabella said, trying to regain control. The most traditional family in Zurich. They always lend the space for our charity auctions. What Isabella didn't know was that Veronica Fairchild had married discreetly 2 years earlier in an intimate ceremony in the Swiss Alps, far from the spotlight of society. Her husband had expressly asked to keep a low profile, preferring to work behind the scenes on her own philanthropic initiatives. Interesting, David murmured, returning to drying the dishes with a calmness that now seemed almost theatrical. And tell me, when was the last time you two discussed the arrangements for this auction? Gideon Blackwood, growing increasingly irritated by what he perceived as insubordination, intervened abruptly. Listen, we don't have to answer to him. You're here to work, not to ask questions. It was at that moment that something fundamentally changed in the atmosphere of the kitchen. David placed the plate he was drying on the counter with a deliberate movement and turned completely to face the elite trio surrounding him. You're right, he said, in a soft voice, but one charged with an energy that made all the employees stop what they were doing again. I am here to work, but not in the way you imagine. Before anyone could respond, the sound of firm footsteps echoed down the hallway leading to the kitchen. Sophia, who had worked in that gallery for 2 decades, immediately recognized the rhythm of those footsteps. Miss Fairchild is coming, she whispered to another employee, but loud enough for David to hear. David's eyes lit up. Perfect. She's right on time. Isabella frowned, confused. What do you mean, right on time? You shouldn't even be here when she arrives. People like you. People like me? What exactly? David interrupted her, his voice now carrying an authority that made Isabella instinctively take a step back. The footsteps grew closer, and David began to head toward the kitchen door. Isabella tried to block his way. You can't leave here, not without finishing the job. My job here, David said, delicately removing the apron he had been forced to wear, is just beginning. Meanwhile, outside the kitchen, Veronica Fairchild was talking to her personal assistant, John, who had arrived with her. The meeting ended earlier than expected, Veronica said, adjusting the cuffs of her dress. I hope David didn't get too bored on his own at the gala. John consulted his tablet. Actually, Mrs., there was a minor incident. Security reported that a man attempted to enter through the main entrance without a proper invitation and was directed to the service entrance. Veronica stopped abruptly. A man? What description? Black man, around 30 years old, tailored suit. Veronica's face hardened in a way John had rarely seen. And where is this man now? I believe the event organizer, Madame Moretti, put him to work in the kitchen. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then Veronica closed her eyes and took a deep breath, like a woman trying to control monumental anger. John, she said in a dangerously calm voice, I want you to document everything that happened tonight. Every person involved, every word spoken, every action taken, everything. Yes, Mrs. May I ask why? Veronica was already walking toward the kitchen with increasingly rapid steps. Because my husband has just been forced to serve at his own wife's gallery. In the kitchen, Isabella was still trying to process David's increasingly confident behavior when she heard Veronica's familiar voice echoing down the hallway. Where is my husband? The question resounded like thunder, and Isabella felt her stomach drop. She looked at David, then at Gideon and Olivia, trying to understand why this question made her so nervous. Her? Olivia repeated, confused. But Veronica has never brought a husband to our events. That's when David smiled. A radiant smile that completely transformed his expression and revealed the powerful, confident man he had always been, even under the guise of a humiliated employee. Actually, he said, extending his left hand to show a diamond wedding band he had kept discreetly hidden. She did bring one. You just decided that I should be in the kitchen instead of the main gallery. The ensuing silence was broken by the sound of Veronica's footsteps approaching rapidly, and Isabella finally understood the magnitude of the mistake she had made. But what none of her friends had yet known was that David had recorded every second of the humiliation on his cell phone, which had remained strategically positioned in his apron pocket. And in about 3 minutes, when the whole truth was revealed, those recordings would become the evidence that would turn the most prestigious art auction of the Zurich elite into the most devastating scandal high society had ever witnessed. Veronica. Isabella's voice came out as a strangled whisper when the imposing figure of the gallery's owner appeared at the kitchen door. Her eyes quickly scanned the scene. David with his apron in his hands, Gideon and Olivia clearly uncomfortable, and herself looking like a child caught doing something wrong. David, my love, Veronica said, completely ignoring the presence of the others and walking directly toward him. John told me what happened. Are you okay? The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Isabella felt her legs tremble as reality finally hit her with full force. Gideon Blackwood swallowed hard, his face losing all color, while Olivia Sterling seemed to have shrunk inside her expensive dress. I'm perfectly fine, David replied with a serenity that now made perfect sense. In fact, it was a very educational experience. Veronica embraced her husband tenderly, but her eyes were pure ice when they finally turned to the elite trio who had humiliated the man she loved. Isabella Moretti, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Miss Sterling, Mr. Blackwood, how nice to meet you in my home. Veronica, we didn't know. Isabella began to stammer, her hand shaking visibly. Didn't know what exactly? Veronica interrupted. That my husband is a person who deserves basic respect? Or did you just not know that he is my husband? Gideon tried a conciliatory approach. His previous arrogance completely evaporated. Miss Fairchild, there was a misunderstanding. If you had known, would you have acted differently? David interjected softly. That's exactly the problem, Gideon. You only treat people with decency when you know they have power. It was at that moment that Veronica noticed David's cell phone discreetly positioned on the kitchen counter, still recording. A cold smile appeared on her lips. John, she called to her assistant, who had remained at the door. Please come in and bring your tablet. We have some important calls to make. Isabella desperately tried to regain control of the situation. Veronica, we can resolve this civilly. It was just a misunderstanding. Civilly? Veronica repeated, her voice rising slightly. Like forcing my husband to serve in our own home? Like calling him people like that? Like suggesting he was here to pick up some rich woman? Olivia's eyes widened. She hadn't realized that David had heard every cruel word they had said. You recorded everything, didn't you? Olivia whispered, horrified. David calmly held his cell phone. Every word, every cruel laugh, every prejudiced comment disguised as social concern. John approached with a tablet, and Veronica began making calls while speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. Good evening, Miss Dubois. Yes, it's me. I need you to immediately withdraw the Fairchild Foundation sponsorship of all events organized by the Moretti Art Foundation. Yes, permanently. It's not negotiable. Isabella felt the world collapse around her. The Fairchild Foundation was responsible for 60% of her annual contracts. Veronica continued. dialing another number. Gideon Blackwood, correct? Yes. I need to inform you that all Blackwood asset management contracts with Fairchild Fine Art are effectively canceled. I don't care about the penalties. Gideon tried to protest, but Veronica was already on her third call. Olivia, you work at Sterling Maritime Holdings, don't you? What a coincidence. I just canceled the contract to transport all of our art pieces for global exhibitions. The three figures of the Zurich elite watched helplessly as their worlds collapsed in real time. But Veronica wasn't done yet. David, could you show me those recordings? She asked gently. He tapped his phone screen, and the cruel voices of Isabella, Gideon, and Olivia echoed through the kitchen. Every prejudiced comment, every malicious laugh, every humiliation they had inflicted was documented in crystal clear audio. John, please make sure copies of these recordings are sent to the Swiss National News, Art Basel magazine, all major local television stations, and especially to Global Elite Confidential. They love this kind of story about elite hypocrisy. Veronica, please, Isabella begged, tears beginning to stream down her face. This will ruin my life. How did you try to ruin the dignity of my husband? Veronica replied coldly. The difference is that he did nothing to deserve your treatment. You, on the other hand, chose every cruel word you said. Sophia, the veteran employee who had worked at the gallery for 2 decades, watched everything with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. In all those years, she had never seen anyone defend the service workers the way David and Veronica were doing at that moment. There's one last thing, David said. His voice maintained that serenity that everyone now understood was not submission, but controlled power. Isabella, you mentioned that people like me never get very far in life. I would like you to know that in addition to being Veronica's husband, I'm also the CEO of Art Tech Dynamics, which has just been hired by the city of Zurich to review all of the city's public art funding contracts. The last trace of color drained from Isabella's face. Her foundation's contracts with the city would be the first to be reevaluated. As the 3 perpetrators of the humiliation left the gallery in a state of complete shock, knowing that their reputations would be shattered by dawn, David finally allowed a genuine smile to appear on his face. Justice had been served. But more importantly, that night would prove to all of Zurich that a person's true character has nothing to do with the color of their skin, but with how they treat those they consider to be beneath them. The next morning, even before the sun had fully risen over Zurich, the headlines were already dominating every newspaper and news site in the city. The silent revenge. How Zurich's elite was unmasked in a single night, read the Swiss National News. David's video recordings had been viewed more than 2 million times in the first 12 hours. Isabella Moretti woke up to her phone ringing incessantly. Dozens of clients were canceling contracts. Journalists were asking for statements, and even employees of her own company were publicly resigning. In 72 hours, the Moretti Art Foundation, a company that took 20 years to build, had lost 95% of its contracts. Madame Moretti, her assistant said on the phone, her voice trembling. The Rothstein Foundation has just confirmed that it will not be renewing our contract. And there's more. The Zurich Museum of Modern Art has also canceled the fall auction. Isabella looked out the window of her penthouse apartment, knowing that soon she would not even be able to afford the rent there. The world she had built based on connections and prestige was collapsing like a house of cards. Gideon Blackwood was not faring any better. The recordings revealed not only his prejudiced comments, but also his discriminatory mindset in general, which led international partners to question all of his business deals. In 1 week, Blackwood Asset Management had lost contracts worth millions. Dad, have you seen the news? His son had called him crying from university where he was studying. My friends are sharing the video. I'm ashamed to use our last name. Olivia Sterling discovered that the business world has a long memory. In addition to canceled contracts, Internal investigations began to surface about discriminatory practices at her company. Employees who had previously remained silent out of fear now felt encouraged to report years of microaggressions and institutionalized prejudice. Meanwhile, David and Veronica were receiving hundreds of messages of support every day. Technology entrepreneurs from across the country sought him out for consulting. Universities invited him to speak on corporate diversity, and his company, Art Tech Dynamics, had to hire 10 new employees to keep up with demand. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" Veronica asked during a quiet breakfast 3 weeks after the auction. David smiled. "Not exactly. I expected exposure, but not such a systematic change. People are really questioning structures that have been in place for decades." The impact had spread far beyond Zurich. The Serve with Dignity challenge went viral, with people across the country sharing their own experiences of discrimination in elite settings. Restaurants, galleries, and companies began reviewing their customer service and hiring policies. Sophia, the veteran employee who had worked at the gallery for 2 decades, received an unexpected offer. David had created a training program for service professionals, offering courses in administration and hospitality management. "I never thought that at 60, I could still dream of a new career," Sophia said during the graduation ceremony for the first group of participants. "But Mr. Cooper showed us that it's never too late to rebuild our dignity." 6 months later, Isabella tried to reinvent herself as a cultural sensitivity consultant for events. But no one took her conversion seriously. Gideon Blackwood sold the family business for a fraction of its real value and moved to a distant suburb where no one knew his story. Olivia faced labor lawsuits and had lost her seat on the board of her company. During an interview on a national television program, David was asked if he felt any remorse for the consequences his actions had brought upon the 3 of them. "Remorse?" he repeated, considering the question carefully. "I feel compassion for the pain he is experiencing. But I cannot feel remorse for exposing attitudes that have caused pain to countless people over the years. What happened to them is a direct result of their own choices." The interviewer pressed. "But don't you think the punishment was disproportionate to the crime?" David leaned forward. "Let me tell you about disproportionate. It's when a black man who graduated from MIT is automatically directed to the service entrance. It's when people judge your worth based on the color of your skin before they even know your name. It's when workers are humiliated daily by people who consider themselves superior. That's disproportionate." Veronica, watching from the audience, smiled proudly. Her husband had become a powerful voice for change that the country had needed for decades. A year after the fateful auction, David was invited to give the keynote speech at MIT's graduation. Before an audience of future business leaders, he concluded with words that became a manifesto for a generation. "True power does not lie in humiliating those you consider inferior. True power lies in elevating those whom society tries to diminish. The best revenge against prejudice is not to destroy those who practice it. It is to build a world where such prejudice can no longer thrive." The audience rose to a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Isabella, watching from his small rented apartment, turned off the television with tears in her eyes. She finally understood the magnitude of what she had lost that night. Not just contracts or money, but the opportunity to be part of something bigger than her own ego. 2 years later, when David was appointed to the Zurich Art Commission to lead diversity initiatives, he received an unexpected letter. It was from Isabella, offering a sincere apology and asking if there was any way to repair the damage she had caused. David replied with a single sentence: "Reparation does not come through letters, but through actions that lift others up as you tried to tear me down." In the end, David Cooper's story proved that the most powerful justice is not that which destroys the enemy, but that which builds a better world despite him. His forced humiliation in a kitchen became the catalyst for social change that benefited thousands of people facing similar discrimination. And when asked about the legacy he would like to leave behind, David always replied that no one else should ever be forced to prove their dignity, that it should be recognized as an inalienable right of every human being. The best revenge, he discovered, was not to destroy those who had humiliated him. It was to use the humiliation as fuel to light a path that others could follow toward a more just future. If this story of resistance, dignity, and social transformation touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more narratives that prove that sometimes your most difficult moments become the seeds of the most necessary changes.